And we are live.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to European Freelancers Week, EF Week 2018. My name is Jeannine van der Linden. I'm with the European Coworking Assembly, and I'm going to be your moderator for the panel today. This is our kickoff event. I'm going to start today by introducing you to our first two speakers. Marco Torregrossa is the coordinator of European Freelancers Week and is a warrior and champion of freelancing and the new economy. For 15 years, he's been busy helping millions of Europeans discover the freelance economy. He's also Secretary General at the European Forum of Independent Professionals, known as EFIP. When we say EFIP in this panel, that's what we mean, the European Forum of Independent Professionals. It's a European association that advocates for policy, business, and society become more conducive to self-employment. I also like to introduce you to Shiraz Mahfoudhi. Hi, Shiraz. Shiraz started her career as a private equity analyst before joining an equity crowdfunding startup. Now she works for Malt. Malt is a platform that connects freelancers with businesses all over Europe. Shiraz started as a country launcher in Spain and is now busy with Malt, spreading the word all over Europe. Today, EFIP, through Marco and Shiraz, are also going to announce the results, the preliminary results of their European-wide survey of freelancers in Europe. So, Marco, go.
Hello. Thanks, Jeannine. I want to officially welcome everyone to European Freelancers Week. I'll explain what it is, what we're going to do this year, and where we are headed for the future. So, European Freelancers Week is a crowdsourced series of events held under a common theme and branding across Europe. This year, it runs from today until October 21st. And will feature more than 153 events and deals which have been registered on our site. And we estimate an attendance of around 3,500 freelancers and co-working spaces. So it's a big number, which makes European Freelancers Week actually the world's largest annual festival celebrating independent work and helping millions of Europeans to discover the freelance economy. Now, the freelance population is very heterogeneous, a very diverse group in a continuously evolving environment. So it's usually difficult to put them together for something and even forge a unified voice that compels attention. But once again, the European Freelancers Week managed to do so using the power of co-creation. So coming to this year's edition, what is remarkable as compared to last year is the growth, not necessarily in the number of events, but in the number of European countries in which the events were organized. So this year we'll have events in 32 European countries, whereas last year we only had 18, just to give you an idea. So from Portugal to Finland and Turkey to Scotland, events will stretch all across the continent. So wherever you are, chances are there's going to be a European Freelancers Week event near you. Now, why is it important to mention geographical distribution? Well, because freelancers, as a highly skilled subset of the self-employed, tend to be concentrated in some countries, in a number of countries with a large service sector and the knowledge economy. So, for example, the United Kingdom, Italy, and Germany together account for more than half of the entire freelance population in Europe. And now this is reflective from the number of events submitted from these countries, particularly from Italy. But on the other hand, we had a large number of Eastern European and Nordic countries joining European Freelancers Week for the first time this year, which confirms that the freelance population is both growing and getting organized in these countries. So what else? Meetup was the most common format of events that will be organized this year. And it sort of confirms the need for informal networking among freelancers and a sort of a come out of the shade message that co-working space are trying to convey to their customers. By the way, co-working spaces are the biggest event organizers also this year in European Freelancers Week. What else? This year we introduced the possibility for our partners to offer special deals to freelancers during the week. And these are typically discounts or promotional offers that freelancers can redeem on our site. And it was a very successful initiative with around 28 deals being listed on our site. And again, this demonstrates the potential. There is a potential market for products addressed to freelancers. Shortly about topics. Besides the many events on information technology, as usual, this year I think the topic of Social Security has emerged rather prominently from events that will be organized. And frankly, this is not surprising because accessing Social Security is one of the top 3 concerns of the self-employed, together with finding new clients and accessing new markets. So there's the so-called business-related consideration. So I think caused by a lack of alternatives offered by governments, such as the welfare system, but also by the market, so a lack of financial and insurance products. I think freelancers are now starting to join forces with one another and rely to, yes, an alternative source of support, which is, as I said, each other. Now, this year team, which is also the topic of the panel discussion today, is working together in the new economy, which aims to drive all events towards one objective, which is creating an ecosystem of support and collaboration made by freelancers for freelancers. Because when you hear the word self-employed, what usually comes to mind is do it yourself, but so not really building something together. But we believe, or we hope, that it won't take long before in people's mind the word do it yourself, which is referred to self-employment, will be turned into do it ourselves. So finally, this year we didn't set any specific call for action in European Freelancers Week. Rather, the message was get out there, build community with your peers, and self-organize yourself. Now, we did that on purpose because we didn't want to restrain the bottom-up growth, the bottom-up and organic growth of the movement. We just wanted to shed light on the value on the enormous value that freelancers bring to the European economy and society, and bring that to the forefront of the future of work debate. However, this may change for next year because in preparation of the 2019 elections in the European Parliament, we will campaign in support of a new freelancers manifesto that will include a few core principles that we will ask freelancers to sign up to. And we have done exactly the same 4 years ago for the previous elections, and we brought 10,000 signatures from freelancers to the European Parliament, which was a tremendous success. So there will be a number of ways for European freelancers to engage with us in the new manifesto, so stay tuned for more details. And that's all for me now. Well, last but not least, I wanted to thank, obviously, our sponsors, without whom we would not have been able to do any of this, and our many network partners that helped us with dissemination. And now, all I can say is I'm urging you to go out there, join one of the events near you, and have fun. So thank you, Jeannine, and I look forward to the discussion. Jeannine, you have to unmute yourself.
Thanks, Marco. Shiraz, you're up.
Thank you, Jeannine. Hi, everybody. So I'm Shiraz. I work at Malt, which is, as Jeannine said, a freelancing platform. So we actually partnered with IFIP a couple of months ago in order to launch this great research on freelancing in Europe. The idea came up because actually there were a lot of reports and surveys on freelancing, but on different countries. And we wanted to have something, to gather some data on freelancing in overall in Europe, and be able to have something to be able to have a common voice of freelancers in Europe. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen, and you're going to tell me if you can see something, because we have some preliminary results which are quite enlightening. So can you see anything?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
great. So the survey was actually launched, as I said, in end of July, so 2 months ago. The thing is that freelancers are becoming a huge part of the workforce right now in Europe. They account for 7% of the workforce. So there is obviously an economic stake, because they contribute a lot to the economy. Just to give you a rough number, in the US, for example, they contribute to $1.4 trillion, where they account for obviously 20 to 30% of the workforce. But it's something that could happen easily in a couple of years in Europe. And there is also, I would say, more a public stake, because as freelancers become part of the workforce, they have expectations, needs that might be different than the ones from employed and salaried people. This survey was composed of 38 questions, and the objective of this survey was really to understand the pain points they have, the expectations they have towards policymakers, and also the way they were working. Because usually when we think about freelancers, we think that they work in their at home, and they don't talk to anyone. So we just wanted to make sure that the cliches and the myths that exist around freelancers were true or not. We just wanted to test them. And so the first thing I would like to highlight is actually the motivation of freelancers. They chose actually to become freelancers, and that's quite a huge number, because 77% of freelancers in Europe chose to become independent workers. So this is completely, I would say, in opposition to the cliche that freelancers are forced to become freelancers because actually they cannot find a job. However, I would like just to highlight the fact that there are obviously discrepancies between countries. For example, in France, this number is 88%. So 88% of French freelancers chose to become independent, whereas in Spain, where Malt is also active, it's only 71%. So we can definitely explain this because of the maturity of the market on freelancing. It's not the same, and policymakers are also not doing the same things in France and in Spain, for example. In Spain, it's much more difficult to become freelancers, whereas in France, it's becoming easier and easier. So that's the first point. The second point is that we asked freelancers how they felt about being freelancers. And the good thing and the positive thing is that the majority of them feel proud of being freelancers. However, they admit, they recognize that they are not supported enough by policymakers. And the number is quite high, I think. So this is something that should definitely be working. We should definitely be working on in the future. Then the thing we wanted to understand actually is why they chose to become freelancers, and I think it's not very like the answers are not really striking, because obviously the first reason is that they want to be flexible in their schedule, and they also want to be able to choose their own projects. The third reasons that I think quite interesting is that they say that they want to work from the location of their choice. So, you know, we've been hearing a lot about remote working, but it shows that we still have a lot, a way to go towards remote working in companies, for example, because it can be actually a breaking point between potential salaried and companies. Then we wanted to actually understand better, as I said earlier, the pain points they have. As Marco said it, finding clients is definitely the first one. And then income fluctuations. So the fact that you don't know if, you know, you're going to have projects in the coming weeks, coming months is really a concern for them. And obviously, the third point is the absence of some employee perks. So that can be a wide range of perks, you know, ranging from, I don't know, a car, a phone, etc. And this is something that they lack. And so this is also something that could be maybe implemented by some policymakers in the future. At least that's some food for thought, and that was the whole purpose of the survey. And then maybe the last point I'd like to highlight is the topics that freelancers would like to see addressed in the public debate. And well, once again, as Marco pointed out, social security is a huge concern for freelancers. And this is really the same number in all countries. So there are no discrepancies. Social security is a major concern. And actually, we should really try to find a solution at European level in order to get the markets which are not mature yet to grow even more and even more quickly. So these are some of the main results, but I encourage you to go on our website. The whole infographics is downloadable, so you can download it there. And we're gonna publish also a report which goes obviously in more depth in the analysis in the coming weeks. So stay tuned for this. And I'm just gonna stop sharing my screen. I hope this was clear. Don't hesitate if you have any question, and if you want me to send you the infographics directly, I can do it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shiraz. That's really interesting. I want to now because we're going to run out of time if we're not careful, get everybody to introduce themselves one by one. Can we do that? Let me see. Let me start with Sarah from Smart.
Hi. So
Hi.
I'm Sarah. I work at the development and strategy units of Smart, and Smart is a cooperative of freelancers that use this shared enterprise to develop their economic activity, and we allow them to access also not only our tools but also the status of salaried workers, so that they can access more social protection, even though they are freelancers.
Great, thanks, Sarah. I think probably what we're going to do is go through and let everybody introduce themselves, and then we'll start throwing questions. I was sitting here thinking about, should I hit you with your first question now? But I think maybe we ought to go ahead and introduce everybody first. I think that would be good. We have Alex from Estonia E-Residency. Where are you, Alex? Hi,
hey,
Alex.
Hello, everyone. Hi, my name is Alex Wellman. I'm head of marketing here at E-Residency, coming to you from Tallinn, Estonia. E-Residency is a program from the government of Estonia. It's the first country to offer this. and it allows anyone to receive a digital ID card, government-issued digital ID card, which offers access to services here in Estonia. So one of the number one reasons why people sign up is because they want to set up a company in Estonia, and we see a growing number of freelancers using this option as a way to reduce administrative burden, etc.
Hold on, Alex. Alex, I'm sorry. I'm sorry to interrupt you, my friend. We have a really unpleasant echo coming in. Marco, can you mute Alex? Let me move on to the next one. And Alex, I promise I'm going to come back to you.
Okay.
But you definitely don't want people having that be their first impression, because the E-Residency is really cool and everybody wants to know about it. They're all asking me. Marco, can you mute that for me, please? And let's see. Next, we got Hector. Hi, Hector. Hector is with us from Included. Hector, can you introduce yourself?
Hey, everybody. I'm Hector. I'm the founder of Included.co. Essentially, what we do is we create shared buying power. And by doing that, we can deliver valuable member benefits into co-working, freelancer, gig economy communities, pretty much all around the world. And I'm super excited to be part of this. I mean, I started my career as a freelancer in Europe. I'm currently sitting in not so sunny New York early in the morning, and I'm happy to be part of this. I'm looking forward to the rest of the conversation.
Thanks, Hector. Alex, have we got that squared away now, or do we need to move on to the next one?
Is this any better or not?
Nope.
Okay.
Still there.
Okay.
We're moving on.
Okay,
Can we move to Brian King of Toptal?
Yes, thanks, Jeannine. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Brian.
So I work for Toptal. Toptal is a network connecting the world's top talent with leading global companies. I'm Europe community lead, so I engage with our extensive talent network throughout Europe. Before I was a community manager, I was a software developer, a freelance software developer for 15 years. So I'm well aware of a lot of the pain points that people have, but also I've experienced a lot of joy in freelancing. So happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now we have the other Brian. We have Brian and Brian. We have Brian Carey from Cowork. Hi, Brian.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I thought Brian was an Irish name, all right, and I think the other Brian is also Irish, if I have my accent correct. So yeah, I'm the founder of a co-working space in Ireland called Cowork. There. What we're doing in Cowork is we're looking at creating and fostering a freelance environment in regional areas. So there's a big pull in Ireland towards urban environments, be it Dublin or the other cities. And what we're looking to do is provide space for people who want to work in lower cost environments, be they in towns or in villages outside of those main urban spaces. So we've got our first here in Mallow, a town in Cork, and we're looking at phase 2 and 3 in other towns at the moment. I've also worked as a freelancer. I worked for the last 2 years as a freelancer, a slasher, as we call in Ireland. So I was a freelancer plus a founder plus a few other things. And yeah, I have a lot of experience in this area. I also have it from the other side. I worked 10 years in an oil and gas company, so a corporate environment, so I can see the pros and cons of both sides. I think what was particularly interesting on the presentation that was given was the pros that were given from freelancers. So having flexibility in terms of time, having flexibility in terms of what they work on, and having flexibility in terms of location. I think that's a big benefit to being a freelancer. I think that one of the downsides, I think, of being a freelancer, and it's what's particularly interesting with this discussion, is the collaboration side. So sometimes I think freelancers can feel a bit isolated in the work they're doing. And so collaboration, I think, is very important, not only for value to the business, but also I think for the mental health maybe of freelancers themselves. So I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Brian. And I think the last one, if I've got my list right, we have Laurin Sepoetro from Uber.
Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me, and I hope you can see me. I'm not sure if my Wi-Fi connection is stable. My name is Laurin. I'm covering public policy for the EU for Uber here in Brussels, and I'm leading the thinking of Uber on the future of work. As you may know, Uber is a platform that works with professionally licensed independent drivers across the EU. And a substantial part of that is actually drivers that have other freelancing activities on the side. And this is where we are actually expanding our thinking on how we can actually offer more access to skills improvement opportunities, social protection, as a value proposition for using our app. So I'm really interested to hear from everyone experiences, and very excited to partner for this European Freelancers Week. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laurin. Yeah, I never thought of that connection with Uber. I look forward to talking about that later on. All right, Alex. We got you now, Alex?
All right. Is this any better?
Beautiful.
Beautiful.
It's beautiful.
Okay.
Tell me about E-Residency, Alex. I'm dying to know.
I had to switch to a different pair of headphones. So yeah, you know, Estonia is often called E-Estonia. So sometimes we have to live up to our name. So thanks everyone for giving me another chance to speak. As I mentioned, my name is Alex Wellman. I'm head of marketing here at E-Residency. E-Residency is a program from the government of Estonia that allows anyone to get a government-issued ID card, which can be used to set up a company, access different services here in Estonia. And one of the biggest reasons why people sign up is because they want to set up a company in Estonia and run it from anywhere. So we have lots of freelancers from inside of Europe and around the world signing up for this program. So this is our second year supporting European Freelancers Week, and I'm really excited to be here and participate in this panel.
I think you're on mute.
Do it again. I did it again. Sorry, guys. We're gonna start with a fairly open-ended question. The theme of this year's EF Week is freelancers and collaboration. We've already been talking about it in the introduction. So this is a completely sort of open kind of a question. Everybody's on mute except me. And so here's what I'm going to ask you. If you want to answer this question, take yourself off mute and I'll call you. Let's see if that works. First question, tell me, what do you think about freelancers collaboration as a theme in general? What are your thoughts? All right, if nobody has thoughts, I'm just going to call out some names.
I'm happy to jump in there.
Go, Hector.
Well, I mean, coming from a freelancer background, I mean, I started my career in a tiny little island called Cyprus in Europe. Pretty notorious over the last few years, but when I started out, there was no freelancing movement, there was no collective, there was no nothing, and it was a very isolated experience. I thought that I was doing something wrong, I didn't know what I was doing, and I longed for some sort of community to exist. So I think that now that we're sort of having these conversations, it's going to open up this way of life for a lot of people who wouldn't have normally done it if there wasn't this collaborative force of people being able to work alone but work with other people. And I think co-working is actually a big driver of that. I'm not sure if that answered the question.
No, that's a great leader because co-working is a big driver of that. Brian, tell me what's your experience with co-working being a big driver of that. Unmute yourself. That's my trick. There you go.
So I think this kind of goes back to what I mentioned earlier. So there's a lot of positives to freelancing, both from a freelancer perspective and also from a customer perspective. Location and cost. I think cost is a big factor for both parties. What we find with co-working, and one of our main selling points with co-working, especially in a more regional environment, is that social element. So we find we're working from home. So they might be not working on a cliched kitchen table, but they were very much isolated from a community in that environment. And humans we're community-based people. We thrive on community, and I think where co-working definitely facilitates freelancing is around that socializing with other people, and with co-work and in other co-working environments in Ireland, that is the main benefit that customers see from working in that space. I think when you look at Ireland and co-working, one of the things that is very important here is we have we have a bit of an unbalance between supply and demand. So supply and demand of houses in particular in the urban environments. And so there is a push and a pull towards regional locations. And I see, and a number of my peers also see, co-working as key in facilitating the accommodation of that business development outside of those urban environments.
Yeah, I think that's true. My own co-working space is in a town of 50,000. One of the co-working spaces in our network is in a village of 3,000 people. And it might be 3,001 if Mrs. Janssen has had her baby. I mean, it's really that small. And we also have locations in Amsterdam. One of the things I notice, tell me if you see the same thing, that community, when we talk about community, we're talking about a different thing in an urban setting and in a smaller rural or near rural setting. Is that your experience as well?
Yeah, so I've worked in, as I mentioned, I worked out of workspaces in Dublin and Cork as well. And there, I think the collaboration aspect is very powerful because simply you have more people. So you have more people, freelancers in the location. And so you have more diversity in the skills of the freelancers working in the workspaces. So for example, if you're looking to get a platform developed, then you have front-end developers, back-end developers. You might have someone helping you with a presentation. You might have product managers, and they're all in that space. And that collaboration element is very powerful. But generally, they're all in one location in the urban environments, I have found. When you're looking towards the regions or regional nations, you might be working across different workspaces. So for example, for those who are familiar with Ireland, we have people here who have freelancers in Cork City, freelancers in towns in Cork, but also freelancers in Limerick, so other counties. So you're still working across different co-working spaces, but people are more distributed geographically.
Yeah, I think that's true. Sarah, I think all the co-working people are like professionals. We all talk about community all day long because it's one of our 5 values. But it's my understanding that SMART actually is also interested in community and connecting its freelancers. Is that your experience? I need you to unmute yourself. That's my trick. It's my trick to leave the mute on.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Great. So we have different ways of connecting the members and make them collaborate or facilitate the collaboration, let's say, between the freelancers of our community, of our co-op. We have working spaces that can be like co-working as in longer term rental, but we try to mix people from different sectors of activities so that they can really enlarge their network. But we also have tools that allow them to work collectively together in a flexible way. What we see is that freelancers often do, in our community at least, often do work with others. But it's for specific projects. It will be limited in time, even though they can eventually regularly work together. And I think that we really need to enable that for people to work together at one moment, then be alone, and then or with another group. And this is what we propose to our members with our activity tool. And also, because we became a cooperative quite recently, we've been existing for 20 years, but we only started the process of becoming a co-op about 3-4 years ago. For us now, it's even more important than it was before to really get the community of our members to really connect and have moments where they can also decide on and shaping this cooperative. We have working groups and they can think of how it should function, how could we improve our tools, should we set up a ethic committee, do we have working groups we want to focus on. And also the next step for us now is really to help our members support themselves in their profession or their sectors of activity. I mean, we have over 25,000 people on a yearly basis who use our services. We have transversal services, but we realize that we really have to help them in working collectively together and self-structure themselves. So we can kind of be a hub for freelancers to create their own collectives or co-ops that they can shape at their own model, so they can also be stronger on the market, but also as persons, as they can exchange, do peer learning, and develop their own collective business that can make them more powerful than if they are alone.
Well, that's excellent. So you're finding that, are you finding, because it's recent, we're looking at the co-op model as well at the European Coworking Assembly level, and a lot of co-working spaces are going to the platform co-op. Are you finding that it, as a structure, actually supports collaboration just by itself, or does it require a lot of work?
It requires a lot of work. I mean, you can lay it down on paper and say that you do, and you can actually do it. But if you really want it to be a collaborative co-op, you really have to make this community work together. You have to really organize that. It just doesn't happen because you're a co-op. You have to design your statutes very well, and you especially have to put content and drive the activities of the members with the members.
That's great. Thanks a bunch. So Laurin, I'm going to ask you now, because you probably, you know, you may not know this, but Uber actually doesn't have a worldwide name for fostering collaboration. But I think you have something to say about that, don't you?
Absolutely. And I think since Uber has emerged also in Europe, where I think we have to make the differentiation first, that in Europe we have moved to a model where we work with professionally licensed independent drivers. And what we have seen is that obviously, given that some of the drivers have been full-time professional drivers before, they already had some type of association and they collaborated. Then we also have drivers who became professional drivers coming from other careers. And with these, we wanted to build something more collaborative. Obviously, they have their WhatsApp group. So I recently spoke to a female Uber driver in Paris who told me that they have a female-only WhatsApp group where they basically keep each other informed, where they talk about issues that they're facing. So very interesting. But I think also from the driver side, what we heard is that they wanted something more, I wouldn't say something more permanent, because we organized roundtables. We organize sometimes expos in the UK, for example, where we have a big event where partner drivers can come and basically talk about airport issues, talk about other issues, talk about accounting, all these things. But they wanted, that's the feedback that we got, they wanted something more permanent, what I said. And we recently launched, actually not recently, sorry, going on for several months, we launched a program called Uber Engage, which is only a pilot because we want to make sure that it actually works and that everyone is satisfied, in which we kind of bring together 5 drivers in each UK city where we operate. And these have official office hours in order to collect feedback from partner drivers directly or anonymously. And this will be then discussed with Uber staff when it comes to changes to the GPS change, like fixing bugs, or when it comes to introducing new features. That's something that we really value, because at the end of the day, we see drivers as our customers. And given that they're independent and that they have other forms of or income streams, we have to ensure that they want to use our app. And we do that if we actually can address the challenges that they're facing. This can be social protection, this can be access to skills improvement opportunities. As I said before, we have quite a few that actually, so we know that drivers had other careers, that they have been freelancing or they came from employed jobs, and they would like to move to another career maybe. And this is why we're trying to kind of get that feedback from them to understand which kind of skills improvement opportunities they would benefit from.
Thanks. You know, that's really, you know, it's really interesting because everybody is talking about collaboration among freelancers, and collaboration among freelancers is really important. I think everybody here can agree. And if you ask any freelancer, they'll all say, yes, that collaboration is really important. We need to get together. And yet there are some, there seems to be something that stops people from doing it because, you know, as Sarah says, it's hard work. I know in the co-working community, we're always thinking of ways, you know, how can we get people together so that they'll start collaborating? One of the points that comes up is trust. What do you think it is that makes it difficult for freelancers to collaborate? Marco.
Well, as I work with governments, I think the policies sometimes are a bit of a block when it comes to improving freelancers' cooperation. I'm quite excited about the trend towards flash teams, where the companies are putting together people, external talent pool of independent workers to solve complex challenges. And this has been done also by co-working spaces in the past. And one of the idea why these teams are being put together is to apply for public procurement. Actually, joint public procurement is still very far in sight of European policymakers. They still require large capitalization for small companies to participate in the bidding in the procurement sector, and these freelancers are usually being left out. So the genius idea was to put together many independent professionals and create a sort of company so they can, go after larger projects. And if these larger projects are run by governmental agency, let them be. So it's all in all rather exciting. What I think that, what we're doing from European Forum of Independent Professionals is that I think policymakers should not take a blanket approach when it comes to policy, because all independent professionals are different from each other. So we need policies that legitimize, professionalize, and support the advantaged segments, but at the same time protect the vulnerable segment. And what is very hot at the moment is actually clearly set out the difference between false and genuine, so that the former can be avoided. We want freelancers to be defined. Actually, that's the starting point of the whole discussion. So we need freelancers to be defined as a unique subset of micro enterprise for the purpose of the European SME definition, and basically just recognize them as economic agents in their own right, providing a very different function than employees and business owners. So it's all about creating simplified policy for freelancers with impact assessment adapted to self-employment, with thresholds or exemptions as applicable, and basically the right incentives for people to remain, to become and remain self-employed, and for the companies to engage them. So in the end, it's a policy environment that promotes a wide variety of contractual arrangements as a way to increase labor market participation and inclusion.
Great. I see Sarah. Sarah has something to say. Go, Sarah.
Question.
Oh, okay. Ask your question.
On what you were saying, Marco, that we need to define the freelancers. And I think this is a very important question. And this is a good place to ask it. Because, for example, in hearing the research by Malt, I see the same issue that we've had in a consortia. We were in a consortia to do a research on independent professionals in Europe. We did it with researchers. We were just one of the partners. And one of the biggest difficulty was to say, what are we talking about? When we say freelancers, do we say self-employed? Because in this whole discussion, we've been jumping from one to another without specifying. For us, for example, self-employed, freelancer is not necessarily a self-employed. And either you're talking in economic terms, in sociological terms, or in legal terms. It's not the same thing. So question is, what do we mean here by freelancers, or at least in the Malt research?
Yeah, I would go as far as to say, Sarah, that your point is even more important in consideration of governmental statistics. How do we count this demographic? Yes, who they are, but how do we quantify them? What are the numbers? I can tell you what our definition is, and then Shiraz probably will tell you their definition. I think, yes, that freelancers are all self-employed, but they are a well-educated and highly skilled self-employed workers without employees nor employers. So there are people that offer specialized skills and of a knowledge-based nature, and work in a variety of bases of creative, managerial, scientific, usually in business to business. So this is our definition. That's what we are trying to push.
And yes, on our part, the definition is more or less the same. It's freelancers are high qualified, self-employed workers. So they can be consultants, graphic designers, web developers, but usually they don't have any, asset, tangible asset, and they don't have a license, for example, like a taxi driver. That's the main definition we take.
Because if you see, it's also very complex when you're talking about different countries. Because in France, for example, there's this status of le salarié entrepreneur, so salaried entrepreneur.
Yeah.
For me, these are freelancers. They only decided a more protective legal status given the situation. And our members are salaried because it's what they chose. This is what the model proposes, but they're freelancers. And what we see is that some of them have a main job that is, let's say, highly skilled sector or type of profession, but they also have low skill jobs, like you also, or jobs that don't necessarily needs high skills. Like some can be artists and also drive for a platform that delivers food on a bike. So for us, it's tricky. It's a very tricky topic.
It's true that, yeah, you can definitely have freelancers who are employed, like with the portage and all those mechanisms. But yeah, so on Malt, for example, we have both. Like we have a mix of freelancers who are completely self-employed and freelancers who are considered to be employees. But yeah, for the research, we were quite conservative. And that's the definition we took.
Yeah, it's always the question, is a plumber highly skilled or not? If you ask me, I think plumbers are extremely highly skilled. I couldn't do the work of a plumber, for example.
My plumber is extremely highly skilled. I don't know about yours.
I mean, we are relying in Europe to something very outdated, which is the European qualification framework. And in there, you have you have a way to find out who's highly skilled and who's not. But the problem is that it always relies on diploma, on qualifications, and less on training and practical experience. So we're going back to the plumber. The plumber may not have a diploma, but may have a lot of practical experience and training. So yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating question. Who's a freelancer? How to define them?
If I may just throw in something, and that's also maybe something that we could discuss, and I would like to get your guys' input in. Basically, why do we want to define what a freelancer is? I think we want to define it because we want to understand what critical mass the European Union is talking about in order to strengthen the need for action, regulatory action, maybe more support. I think in the second step, it is more important. It's not so important who is a freelancer, but let's look, what do these people have in common? So a plumber faces the same difficulties with access to social protection systems and maybe an architect. It's difficult sometimes because for high-level income independent workers, obviously they have set up their own programs, so that's leaving that aside. But I think when it comes to addressing the challenges that independent workers, freelancers are facing, I think this is where we can actually identify common challenges. But I do understand that in order to make the case that something needs to be done, we first need to define this critical mass, to shed light or to tell policymakers that this is something that we need to address. I don't know what others think.
Anybody have specific thoughts on that? So
yeah, sure.
Go.
So obviously, with the structure that our company has, is we kind of support different types of what we call entrepreneurial communities. And instead of sort of quantifying or qualifying what kind of entrepreneur someone is, or kind of if they're a freelancer, a startup, a founder, a consultant, we kind of think of every sort of entity as an entrepreneurial entity. And that's how we look at it. So it's the size of the entrepreneurial entity, whether you are driving for Uber, delivering food for Deliveroo, or selling your services as a consultant. We kind of like look at it as anything or anyone who forges skills, time, and assets into a solution they can provide to the community. That's what we classify as a entrepreneurial entity. And we kind of just look at we look at that on the macro scale. So we operate across 50-something countries now. We found that the legal definitions were different in every single country. We realized that the cultural, I mean, I didn't grow up, but I started my career in Cyprus, and it was frowned upon to call yourself an entrepreneur for a very long time. I didn't even know the word freelancer until I moved to the UK. But it was because of that, because of the way I grew up and because of the different countries we work in, we don't call people freelancers. We support freelancing communities and platforms and gig economy platforms, but we like to think of the actors or the entities as entrepreneurial entities, as opposed to what do we define them as. The less time we spent on what do we define people as, the more we could focus on how do we support their end goals. And that's kind of that's my 2 cents on how we approach the definition question.
All right, so it's sort of a results-oriented kind of a definition. I like that. I think, yeah, it's a way, so being a freelancer is a way of solving a problem.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's got their own motivations, they've got their own challenges. We like to focus on what their challenges are so that they can get to their motivations, as opposed to why and what entity they are and how they identify.
I think another interesting thing as well is that there's a lot of full-time salaried workers who are doing freelance work on the side. So they might not necessarily self-identify as freelancers or see themselves as freelancers, but in fact they are. And they may have social protections or, income security based on their full-time job. And if they had more of that in the freelancing side of things, well, then they might devote more of their time to that or switch full-time to freelancing.
Yes, I meant to ask you that because of your experience at Toptal. That is certainly in my own co-working space and the co-working spaces in the European Co-working Assembly. I'm willing to bet, if I just did a sort of rough back of the envelope estimate, that a third of my coworkers are people who have a full-time job, and they have a side gig. They have a dream. Some of them have a dream. I have 3 who did what we call graduating. That is to say, their side gig grew enough that they then quit their full-time job, and that was their intention. Some people, that's not their intention. Some people, their intention is to have a job and a side gig. Shiraz, is that what you're seeing at Malt as well?
Yes, actually, at Malt we have I think I would say like maybe 20% of people registered on Malt who also are full-time employees. And on the survey we did, actually, we also have, I think it's less. I'm just going to check the numbers, not to tell you, not to be mistaken. But I think we have around, on average, on average, it's 75% of the people who are full-time freelancers. So 25 are not, and have another job on the side. So yeah, it's getting more and more common, and I think we also see some discrepancies between countries. Once again, it's a bit. Maybe cliche, but I think it depends on the maturity of the markets on freelancing, and also on the perks, to say so, like the policy, the local policy, if it favors freelancing or not. And so in France, there is a bit more people who are full-time freelancers than in Spain. Once again, the market I know best. So yeah. We kind of see this mix, and I agree with Brian that indeed, if we gave the same advantages to freelancers, then there would be more full-time freelancers, definitely.
Well, that's really where this question is leading, isn't it? What can governments do? What should governments do? What do we think that? I mean, here we are, the whole European Union. What do we think that governments can do to support freelancers and collaboration among freelancers? I got $5 that says Alex has something to say about this.
Yeah, thanks, Jeannine. Well,
your echo's back. Your echo's back.
Is this any better?
Not yet.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'll let someone else go. I'm not sure why.
Okay, let's. I'm coming back to you though. I bet Marco has something to say about this.
Well, what I would say is that obviously to pick up on what Hector was saying, I think indeed that we need to move past a sort of narrow debate. And this narrow debate sometimes expands to areas such as employees versus self-employed. I think the right questions we should be asking ourselves really is what enabling environment is needed for people to find multiple and better alternatives than a traditional employment. I mean, I don't think we should lament that some people don't get, some self-employed that don't get full-time benefits. We should reconsider why benefits and securities only come attached to a full-time job. And I mean, the challenge is huge. It involves dramatically redesign the safety net, how we classify workers and companies. It may mean for policy makers to finding ways to fund the portable benefits that would cover workers to piece together freelance job or new forms of insurance that would protect against episodic income. So, I mean, it also, I don't want to get there in a way, but I mean, it also goes into, it may mean allowing independent workers to collectively bargain with the platforms hiring them, or even with a universal basic income. So it's really something that would be used to counteract the insecurity of self-employment and gig work, so that somehow citizens are protected from being citizens rather than employees. So I think people that are skeptical about that are making very unfair comparison between the new forms of work at the moment and today full-time employment, because full-time employment of scale has been around for decades, maybe a century. So we have had really plenty of time to understand the huge imbalances and in bargaining power, but also between the individual and the institutions, and corrected in a wide variety of ways.
Yeah, I think that's true. Oops, sorry. Carry on, Marco. I didn't mean to.
No, that's all I wanted to say.
Alex, you want to try again?
I'm hoping this is better.
Yeah. Beautiful. You're beautiful.
Okay, thank you. I don't know what the problem is, but I just wanted to say, yeah, one thing we're seeing is, and it goes back to I think there a little bit earlier in this discussion, we were talking about problems with freelancers collaborating also. We see a certain subset of entrepreneurs, and I agree with Hector. I don't want to get too much into details regarding definitions of freelancer versus all of this, but I think we see people who have an idea as entrepreneurs, and they want to achieve their goals, and they want to get the government out of the way. They don't care about it exactly, you know. So we see this. We see people who have ideas and they just want to execute them. So I think Estonia is unique in this way that 99% of services are available online in Estonia, and that's due to Estonia's kind of sparse population. They've had to develop these services for their own citizens where things are online. So 3 years ago, they said, let's let anyone become an e-resident and access these same services. And you know, while Estonia, of course, is a member of the EU and has to work within the same framework, and suffer some, you know, has to work with all the same rules and regulations of that. Estonia is making strides in serving these types of entrepreneurs better and better. And I think one group particularly we see is the so-called digital nomads, or the so-called freelancers who like to travel. Lots of issues were discussed just now about, you know, working in your home country and all of the problems with that. Now imagine someone who is a European freelancer who wants to take advantage of the freedom of movement and is, you know, moving between countries every 4, 5, 6 months, or, you know, or more often than that. And that's where we see this group of entrepreneurs and freelancers that are running into even more and more problems. So I think, so in Estonia, with E-Residency, we're trying to solve that problem, where we let people have a hub in Estonia where they can set up their company easily. They can do everything with their digital ID card. And if they need to sign a document, they can do it. If they need to identify themselves online through a platform, they can do it. So I think, you know, governments, if you look at the president of Estonia, Kersti Kaljulaid, she was just speaking at the World Knowledge Forum in South Korea. about how this model of Social Security for countries, how people paying Social Security only in one country is really breaking down as people begin to move more frequently and become freelancers and digital nomads. So Estonia is just starting to try to help hopefully solve that problem by giving people a platform and a place to have their business and to have a hub for their activities. And many of them, of course, being freelancers.
I think top-down is only one part of the solution. And I think there's already a lot of great examples of bottom-up organizing and collaboration. So one that's very close to my heart is the open source movement, which has existed for 20, 30 years. I think that's really been a force accelerator for not just software development freelancing, but freelancing in general, in that it built up a lot of the tools around freelancing. So, these were a group of independent individuals who made software to do things that they needed done, right? It was scratching an itch. It solved a particular problem. And, there was some corporate sponsorship in various forms as well, which helped. But most of the time, these folks were working remotely, working at home, doing it in their extra hours and so on. So we see a lot of this in the startup movement as well, where the startup movement is organizing the entrepreneur movement. So, government policy, definitely. We need better and more of that, but we also, need more grassroots efforts as well.
Well, what do you think, Brian, about this? Is really interesting to me. There is a movement here in the Netherlands of people who maintain that the government should be required to use open source software. There's an obvious security downside to that for some of the agencies, but certainly not for all of them. And that seems like it's a place where government policy and open source come together. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. Like you're preaching and converted here. I'm a big open source fan. I think in general, proprietary source code is not a competitive advantage anymore. And Microsoft this week, I believe, released, I could have the number wrong, but 60,000 software patents, open source software patents. So, if Microsoft are doing that, well then, the world has gone upside down, right? I think open source is now mainstream. It's accepted. It's not the competitive advantage anymore. It's the services you can provide around that and the product you build on top of it. For governments, definitely, greater transparency, lower costs of ownership, and there's a whole bunch of other advantages as well.
Well, that seems to be the spearhead here, is that if you're paying taxpayer money, then there's no real justification for you to be spending taxpayer money on a license for proprietary software when there is equivalent or better software, which is open source and free. It has always interested me. So Sarah, we're talking about government policies for freelancers, and you've asked us the question about what is and is not a freelancer, and your model at Smart is really straddles the fence between freelancers and salaried employees. So what policies would you like to see?
Well, as it has already been mentioned here, for us, clearly, if you work and your living depends on the work that you have to do, regardless of the status under which you're working, you should access the same right. You should have access to maternity leave, to sick leave, to paid holidays, and so on. Paternity leave, like the whole thing. But for that, we have to adapt the rules. And what we see, and if I had asked the question of what do you define as a freelancer, is because in our experience and in our research, what we see is that it's not just their salaried workers and their self-employed workers. There's like this gray zone. It goes from, it's all a shading of colors from one to the other. A same job can be performed in very different work arrangements. And you also have there's been also a blurring of boundaries between different legal status, like even within the employees, salaried workers, there are a variety of workers and exceptions that are linked to labor law and social protection. And so if we want the issues of the freelancers to be recognized, we also have to look at all this gray zone between the self-employed and the salaried workers. And when I'm talking about salaried workers, I'm also talking about open-ended contract full-time people who are under full-time open-ended contracts that are new ways of work, because these people are doing exactly what we're talking about. Flexible hours, working from where they want. Only they are salaried workers. So we have to look at the whole image of the labor market, which also allows to see, to take into consideration multi-activity, which has been, or slashers that have already been quoted, and we also, so we should allow different legal statuses, but access to rights should be the same for all workers. Basically, this is what we believe. So there needs to be opening up eligibility criteria to social protection, and more adapted to the evolution of the labor market. This is clearly where we have to go, but it has to be mandatory. And I think that even minimum pay or fees for self-employed workers should be on the table, because this is a big issue.
It certainly is. I mean, it's essentially what we're talking about is a complete shift in how we look at the social safety net. It is because it has historically been about your work status or your dependent status. Those were sort of the options. And now the question is, you know, what does that mean to be employed? Does it mean you have a boss? Does it mean you have a salary? I mean, that's really sort of that blurring area that we're all dancing in, and, you know, the people that we know are all dancing in. What do you think? I'm thinking this one may go to everybody. What's the best example of collaborative arrangements among freelancers that you have ever seen? Ooh, nobody. Come on. Y'all know at least one collaborative arrangement among freelancers. Like, you know, seems to me we have two examples of collaborative arrangements among freelancers right here, don't we?
Yeah, but I can't say smart.
Yes, you can. Otherwise, I will. Is that the best? If it, well, Sarah, if that's it. Hector, you say smart, and Sarah, you say Malt. Sarah, you say included, and then, you know, we'll be there.
Everyone is happy.
And Toptal, yeah, Toptal's pretty good as well.
All right. If nobody's jumping up for that question.
What is quite interesting, actually, I don't know if it's anyone has best practice, but it's the topic of this mutual insurance fund. It's been running by some cooperatives, but also some co-working space. That's addressing really some of the main pain points of freelancers, which is late payments and even sick pay. So I think these are all considerations that often end up in a legal discussion, and it's something really, really complicated when it comes to hold money for others. But that's something we are considering within the co-working movement, within the freelance movement, and this is very interesting in my opinion. So I'm very fond of hearing if anyone has experience on that, and also on the topic of professional development. So the lifelong learning of freelancers, the upskilling of freelancers, whether there are any best practice in collaboration that bring about those results. If there is, we are super happy to profile them within European Freelancers Week, within all the organizations I'm sitting on the board or help running and so on.
Marco, I think you and both Alex hit on the head in the fact that waiting around for governments to implement policy is like freelancers haven't got time for it. And it goes for startups, it goes for all these sort of entrepreneurial entities that we keep talking about. And I think what we're seeing increasingly is the private sector is responding. We're seeing, you know, insurance products on demand or not on demand being built specifically for freelancers. We're seeing E-Residency programs allowing people to have, you know, a global status. And I think that's one of my favorite things of going back to Jeannine's question about my favorite collaborative sort of movement is the fact that all of these cooperatives or collectives or communities are realizing that invisibly they have huge bargaining power, but no one really wants to flex that muscle. So there are companies, mine included. That was a really bad pun. That take that bargaining power, pool it, and go out to the private sector to get the benefits that people aren't getting, maybe from their governments or aren't available currently in the market. So I'm really happy to see both the co-working and the freelancer movement taking those steps and realizing that freelancers don't really have the time to go and negotiate with insurance companies. They don't have the time to go and figure out what is the best supplier of X, and sort of delegating that to their alliance, their co-working space, their POA or their employer is becoming increasingly more popular. At the end of the day, people want to go into freelance for the reasons they stated in the survey, and not so that they can negotiate with insurance or wait for policymakers to implement laws that can help them run their businesses better. So we're seeing a lot of different types of communities realizing that behind the scenes they can share buying power to get the things that their members need and their customers need.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And go.
Sorry, I just wanted to throw in an example. I think that's exactly what has just been said. Is our experience is that drivers have told us that with regards to social protection, they have seen a lot of private options being available out there, but none of them actually being tailored towards them. Because again, the assumption was in the insurance sector that independent workers are normally very high-skilled workers, and therefore the options that were available were quite expensive in terms of the monthly amount that you have to pay. So what we basically did is we spoke with AXA Insurance, and we developed a product called Partner Protection that basically allows independent drivers that like the flexibility to still access some sort of social protection that is actually more tailored towards their needs. So what it does is basically providing on-trip driver injury protection, but it also provides off-trip benefits such as, for example, sick pay and paternity and maternity payments. So this is just the start, and I think this is where you see a lot of interesting initiatives happening in the private sector. But obviously, again, the issues are bigger because we're talking about a bigger problem being the access to social safety net. So I think the private sector can do a lot, and I think freelancers, independent workers can point towards where the gaps are, but I think the big gaps that need to be filled by policymakers. But obviously the private sector can take some steps.
Yeah, that's what's so interesting to me about it, that when we come with, there are a number of really interesting initiatives going on right now, and yet it's as if we in the co-working spaces, and then also when I speak to my co-workers, so also the freelancers and the people with small businesses, haven't quite got our heads around what that new option is. And I find that really the difficulty of communicating that, the difficulty of getting people to come together, because so many of the solutions are thought of by one person, and yet we're also seeing a transition towards solutions that are really bottom up. And Sarah.
Well, yeah, I wanted to talk about the fact that there's an important of weight, because we're talking about collectively working together to be able to negotiate better fees than if people were alone. And the experience of Smart is that it's true. We've been able to negotiate an insurance that is not only for accident at work, but is also applicable for a whole year for our members once they have one contract with us, because we know that freelancers are sometimes working, but they're not paid. That's not considered as work accident. So we needed to have an insurance that was adapted to these workers. But that takes a lot of negotiations. And if we were able to negotiate that, it's because we were talking about thousands of workers. And the fact that it's included kind of in the fee, the Smart fee, it makes it that they don't even see that they're paying it. It's part of the package. And we, as being representing thousands of workers, well, we were able to organize that. And so there are some partnerships that you can do when you represent a lot of people. It gives you more power of negotiation. But what's interesting also is the scale can also help you as an organization to actually provide support to your members. For example, there was this, when there was the terrorist attack in Belgium in 2015, we put into place an exceptional, thanks to our guarantee fund. Usually we use that for people, for our freelancers who are not paid, so that we can pay them within 7 working days. But what we were able to do is to say, well, there were people during the day of the attacks and the following days where the city was totally locked down, where people were supposed to work, but were not working. So we couldn't ask their clients to pay because they didn't perform or do the services they provided. But these people need the money. Like 2 days of not working can be a very big problem. So we actually provided this specific fund to support the people who already had a contract with us for those days, but they could not perform it. And I think that it's very important to have self-help, but we also have to find the right balance between what we're supposed to do as a collective, a bottom-up approach, but also what we advocate for and that we want the state to do. And we have to find a good balance, and it's not always easy.
No, I agree with that. I mean, I myself, I've lived since 2004 in Europe, but I am, of course, American. And one of the things that one confronts in that fact is that there is a very different position in terms of what is the role of government. And in Europe, of course, when we're talking about freelancers across Europe, we are once again faced with the conundrum that what is the appropriate role of government right across Europe in terms of these problems is very different. But I think, is it, well, let me ask you guys this. Is it the absence of solutions from government that is driving solutions from the private sector? Or is it the other way around? Who's got a thought? We're going to ask Alex. Hi, Alex.
Hello. Yeah, I mean.
Oh, there you go. Alex, what is happening with that mic? Try again.
What if is this any better? I'm trying to just talk quietly. Okay.
It seems like every other question.
What about now? No better? Okay, sorry. I think I have to try it one more time.
Okay, let's try it again. So let's go with Brian. Brian, is it the absence of solution from government that leads to solutions from the private sector that leads co-workers to try and organize, or is it the other way around?
From the conversations I've had with my peers here, I don't think there's necessarily an expectation for the government to come with solutions for freelancers. I think an element of freelancing, that the hint is kind of in the name, is the freedom. And I think when you look for freedom or flexibility, I think that comes itself with also some downsides, and that downside is there's a bit more, people look at it as a bit more of a risk. So, for example, a colleague of mine was looking to get a mortgage. For him to provide the evidence to the bank that he could actually fulfill his obligations with the mortgage was difficult, right? Like he didn't go with them to them saying he was a freelancer, because from the perception of the name. Would not be good. Now, what he did do, and I think this is where the solutions will come from, and I think there's been lots of examples of it today, is from the ground up, or from the freelancers up, where you can come up with smart solutions to de-risk yourself. Or so, for example, I know my colleague, he formed a partnership with other freelancers, and what they did was they have contracts with companies where they provide services, and when they demonstrated this contract and this certainty of income to the banks, that fulfilled the bank's requirements in terms of certainty around income. So I think the solution from that I see coming, I think it will very much be from the freelancers. I don't think structurally the governments have to provide solutions. And I don't think realistically in the short term that's going to come. I think the solution is going to come from that bottom level up.
All right, Alex, you ready to try again? Nope.
I think if I can jump in.
Yeah.
So what we're discussing is The issue that I see is that the question is not asked, how can we actually make the independent worker status evolve so that it comes with access to social benefits that are privately provided, but also state provided. So I think this is something that we should look at, because in Europe, we keep talking about how we want to be champions of innovation, how do we want to drive the technological change. But if I would put it in a picture, like I see this future of work is a train that is fast and it's speeding up, but what does this train keep, what does it keep on track? It's basically the tracks that are built from social policy, from access to education, from access to benefits. I think this is something that is often discussed like isolated from each other. So you talk about AI, you talk about technological opportunities which are there, but people might not be able to actually exploit them because they face a social safety net that actually discourages them from making use of new opportunities. So how can we actually work on that issue so that we basically build on a social safety net for the 21st century? That's basically what policymakers have to do. The private sector is doing a lot, I think, and that should be complementary, but it should not, I think, should not bear the big burden here. So, I mean, I have very good examples. I have two friends who actually work with SMART in Belgium. So one is a Russian teacher, the other is an actor. So these are very good solutions. But I think all in all, what they would like is actually that the state is also getting active. And it's not only about like looking for social policy, but also being innovative in that space. Europe as a leader needs to be an innovative player, not only on the technological side, but also on the social policy side.
I think on that point, what I noticed by listening to the discussions around is that I think everybody agrees that we need new support schemes for the new workforce. I think everybody agrees that something should be done, but where people disagree is how it should be done. So if you look at a discussion on portability of benefits in US, which has not yet arrived prominently in Europe, it says basically everyone sort of agrees, but at the end, who's going to pay for that? Is it the workers? Is it the companies hiring them, or the platform using them, or is it the government? If you ask me, it should be a pro rata quota from each of these players. But you understand the complexity of this issue, and also who's going to administer such a fund that gives portability of benefit. What legal entity should it be? Should be a non-profit, in my opinion. But you know, I think
Sorry, many people are basically scared off by this question. I think we need to ask the question. We need to have the debate, whatever the outcome is. But many people say no, it's going to be too complicated. So I think then they stop there. I think we need to have the discussion. What you say, Marco, is absolutely right. So we need to have the discussion, even if it's a tricky one. We need to be patient and we need to energize before we have this discussion, because it's going to be a long one. But once we overcome this, I think this can definitely tackle the issues we're facing.
I think there's policies in other areas which are also having an indirect effect on this. So, you know, it may sound trivial, but, you know, never underestimate the power of the commute, or, you know, a bad commute. And I think, for example, bad public transport policy is driving more people to work at home and getting them to quit their jobs, right? You know, a recent study in the US, just looking at some numbers here, 23% of people said they quit their jobs because of a bad commute. You know, 60% said their employer hasn't taken action. So, you know, employers aren't taking action, bad public transport policy, lack of alternatives. So I think if we want people in all different types of work, you know, we need to look at it more holistically and look at other public policies as well.
And when we think of these topics, I think we should also think of the environmental challenges. I mean, we can't continue to produce and consume as we have been doing for the last centuries. So we have to rethink how much time should we actually be working? And therefore, there has to be more redistribution, because we know that there's automation, there's artificial intelligence, but there's especially environmental challenges. If we don't deal with those, well, they're just not going to be humankind as we know it. So we have to think.
Well, yeah.
Running
out of air and water is definitely a downside of employment. I think that's definitely a thing that needs to be considered in our policymaking. No, really, I mean, we're laughing because it's like saying the sky is blue, and yet, you know, the research on climate change just came out this week, and you know, I'm assuming everybody saw that with the 1.5% change. This is a factor that's going to have to come in. Historically, it's been considered a not relevant point, sort of a side point. But there are some points that just keep looming larger and larger, and that's certainly one of them. And they're going to become the central point fairly quickly, don't you think?
I mean, yeah, it's definitely a driver for why people are choosing not to commute to work or go into work. But it's also, you know, the flip side of that is the other big elephant in the room that no one's really talking about, and that's spending enough time with your family and being where you want to be as opposed to where you want to commute to. I think that's also going to be a big shift in pushing down rent prices, make sure people can afford life. So the economic side and the family side will be as important as the purely environmental side. From what we've been seeing across the network. Just throwing that out there, that it's also a big part. People are obviously caring about the environment, but they also want to spend more time with their family, and they also want to be able to afford a better quality of life. And that's pushing people out of the centers and into more freelance ad hoc type work.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're seeing that in the Toptal network. You know, we have extremely talented developers in places like Serbia, Bulgaria, you know, a lot of Eastern and Southern Europe, where before, you know, if they wanted to, you know, earn a good living, they'd have to go to some of the big hubs in Europe, or they'd have to go to Silicon Valley to really show off their talents. But now there are more and more options to stay at home and to really earn a good living. And, you know, exactly for the reasons you say, they want to build a house there, they want to keep roots, they want to have children. So I think that's one of the primary drivers of freelancing for sure.
Yeah, and even more and more services are coming to you these days. I mean, forget drones and all those things, but for example, here in Finland, what I see is that you still have the house doctors. They come to you. I mean, they started coming back to you in the last years or so, and I think independent work or working from home, remote working is one of the driver behind these movements of more and more services coming to you without you needing to commute to places.
All right, Alex, after all of that, I know you have something to say. Go. You gonna try? I'm brave enough.
All right.
Beautiful.
Is it good? Okay, great.
It's beautiful.
Great. All right. Yeah, I just want to say, I think, you know, as mentioned before, Estonia has 1.3 million people, but has the land area similar to, bigger than Denmark, bigger than the Netherlands. So they've had to develop these kind of services for all of their own citizens, digital services, so that people can stay in their villages and work there and start companies there. And then I think now they've tried to take this expertise and just open it up to the rest of the world. We really see this movement of location independence, people living and being, wanting to live and work where they want to live. And the private sector has several things that have helped spur this. The internet, of course, people being able to work online, work from wherever they want. But when you have the government still wants you to, they want to know where you live. They want to know, you need to live in a certain city to get a certain service or a certain country. So many things are based on residency. So, I think Estonia is, we haven't solved the whole problem yet, but we're starting to tap into this notion of location independence and serving these type of people and many of them freelancers who want to be location independent and live and work where they want to be. And I think more and more countries are going to have to adapt to this model. They're going to have to start serving these people, and they're going to have to change the way they tax their citizens. They're going to have to change the way they give them Social Security. And I think, Estonia is kind of at the forefront of this, but it's only a matter of time before other countries have to catch up to what Estonia has been trying to do as far as serving these types of people.
Yeah, how does it, because that's really, I mean, everybody's all excited about the e-residency just because it's cool, right? I mean, it's cool, it's online, it's nifty, but how does it solve the problems? Because you've been at it for several years, so you've got to have some data. Tell me.
Yeah, sure. So, as I mentioned, it's actually at the core of the program. It's really nothing new. It's just built on top of the existing systems that have been around for Estonian citizens and residents for decades. But in the last 4 years, we've had over 45,000 people apply to become e-residents. And what we're really excited about is they've started over 5,000 companies here in Estonia. So there's two major groups. One are people inside of Europe who want ease of administration, ease of doing business. Maybe they're traveling a lot, and they're sick of dealing with paperwork and bureaucracy from their home countries or from always traveling. So they decide to set up an entity in Estonia, which is more portable and can work with them. Or we see people from outside of Europe who, for example, in Ukraine. Ukraine is the fastest growing country for e-residency. People setting up companies here, they have lots of business relationships with Europeans, people in the EU. But of course, if you've ever tried to pay, make a transfer between Europe and the EU, and Ukraine, it's a nightmare. So we have lots of talented Ukrainians setting up their companies in Estonia. We have people from India and Turkey, kind of the same profile. But then, of course, we have people from Germany and Italy as well who face a lot of bureaucracy at home. They want an easier way to do business. Maybe they spend 6 months of the year in Thailand, and they want just a place that tries to move at the speed that they do, and that they expect that the private sector has done, but other governments just haven't caught up yet. So it's like I said, Estonia is not perfect. Of course, it's not a tax haven. You still have to live and pay taxes. Pay your social taxes where you create value for your company. But I think we're trying to solve it. We're trying to serve this new group of people. So yes, we have lots of work to do, and we don't want to be competing with other governments, but we just want them to catch up and start thinking like Estonia.
Anybody else got thoughts about the government and freelancers?
I think just to chip in on this, I think there's also very good examples how the private sector can actually cooperate with governments. And speaking of Estonia, we have a tax agreement in place where we basically, because we all know like tax bureaucracy and so forth is quite cumbersome at times, and in the age of digitalization, I think it's not only a threat, but it also is an opportunity to basically improve transparency and also improve the communication between the freelancer or the independent worker and the government. So basically what we have put in place, not only with Estonia, but also now with the Czech Republic, is basically that the driver partner can basically decide whether he would like to have a feature in which he, at the end of the year, can just press a button, and then all his economic activities are basically automatically communicated to the Estonian tax authorities in order to facilitate that tax declaration process. Something that I think can be a good model for other countries, and that can actually serve in exploring how we can actually work on a new social security system that can actually be more inclusive for all.
Exactly.
I have a question. So there's one thing that I don't get. So if you're paying taxes in Estonia, you're paying them to the Estonian state. You're not paying them where you're working and living. Or did I get that wrong?
Yeah. So I think we touched on it a few times here, but e-residency in Estonia is not it's not a tax haven. The system is not meant for people to avoid taxes, and in fact, Estonia is a very bad place to do that. Estonia is extremely transparent with its business environment. All taxation for company is public information. You can look up any company, see who the owner is, how much taxes they've paid, etc. So I think, as we were just discussing before, it's actually about ease of doing business. And in Estonia, it shares tax data with other countries. So when you live in one place and you do all of your business there, you do pay your social taxes and your personal taxes there. But of course, your corporate taxes depends on many different factors. Where the value is generated, and we're not. This program isn't meant to make tax money for Estonia. It's meant to bring in more companies to Estonia to work with Estonian citizens and their businesses, give them more customers, improve our digital services that are built for Estonian citizens and make them scale them up so they're better and improving all the time. So it's just about creating a bigger market for the country, I think. So yeah, of course, you still do pay your taxes where you live and generate value.
One piece of advice I always give to freelancers, and definitely while we're waiting for all the gaps to be filled by governments or the private sector, and it's a very simple step, is just to hire a good accountant and/or work law expert. It may seem like a trivial thing, but you'd be surprised how many freelancers try to do their books and the papers themselves, and how much time that sucks up. Don't do that. You may pay, whatever, X euros a month, but it will save you a lot of money in the long run.
Well, I'm going to grab that transition because it's one of the main pain points. Interestingly enough, accounting and taxes, as long as we're talking about paying for the government, one of the main pain points that my coworkers talk about continually when they talk about being a freelancer is exactly that. It is unless they are actually people who do books, keep books, or are themselves accountants. It is either hunting up somebody that you can trust, or it is finding some kind of software that you can use and not making too big a mess of it. That is certainly one of the pain points that came up early when I was setting up a co-working space, and so we started having events in the spaces where our members that were accountants and bookkeepers could come and talk to the other coworkers who were not. And that was really useful. But what other kinds of pain points could be overcome by that kind of collective, collaborative, community kind of an effort? Let's see, Brian. I haven't heard from you in a while. Brian from Cowork.
Yeah, I think I touched off it earlier, but one of the things I've seen with the community effort is certainty of work. So if you're operating in isolated business relationships, so you might have a number of customers you're working with, and you're doing certain methods to flesh out your customer funnel. The work can be hard sometimes to manage the peaks and troughs of the workflow. If you're part of a group, of a partnership who also has access to other customers who similarly are open to using freelancers, so all of a sudden you open out your potential for work to a wider group. And I think what that gives you, which is maybe a bit different to what some of the freelancing platforms, what they give you is that business relationships are very much built on trust. And although there is, of course, reviews and you can see how others have found people on freelancing platforms, if you are part of a group and they trust you to do a certain piece of work, and they trust you enough to refer you to a customer, I think that's very powerful, and that can be very helpful to you to get work, and it can also be very helpful for customers. So again, I think that collaboration with other peers can be very helpful in just in terms of that pure workflow. I suppose to create that steady workflow.
Jeannine, we have a question from the audience.
Oh, good.
On YouTube. It's about the system they have in France as well as in other countries, partagé salariat or umbrella companies. So basically having a back office for the self-employed. And this links, I'm jumping in now because this links with accounting and so on. And I think he's asking whether is this a solution worth keeping in consideration, again, for policymaker or the private sector.
I'll jump in. Well, there's something similar, yet very different between the portage salarial and cooperatives like Coopérative d'Activité et d'Emploi in France, or even the SMART model. The similarities is that we make freelancers salaried workers so they access more social protection as salaried workers and taking care of all the administrative burden. The difference is in the governance of the structure and in where the money goes. So Portage Salarial is business as usual. It's a company that does services, provides good stuff, but then there's a CEO that decides everything and the money is, I don't know, where the benefits go. But in co-ops models, you have a governance that is the members, the users, the freelancers, they are part of the governance. They have a say on where the money goes. And it's not distributed to shareholders who are, I don't know where in the world. It's always re-injected in the community. So I think it's an interesting model. It just depends on what type of business you want to be working in.
Yeah, having heard all of these solutions and given the new reality of work, I'm thinking, and I'd like to pick on some of your brains, particularly considering Shiraz report, Shiraz survey that now will go into a report, and I'm thinking about European Freelancers Week itself that will have a call for action next year and so on. How do you see, what would be the call for action, as a matter of fact? Just as simple as that, of European Freelancers Week, what we would put in this report that we have jointly produced with Malt. What of these great ideas that I heard today should be featured prominently, or anything else? If you just focus on that?
Yes, well, I'm just going to answer, I think, part of your question, Marco, but maybe part of what should be like highlighted by European Freelancers Week would be maybe the pain points that freelancing, that freelancers experience, and then the solutions we've talked about. So either top down, but maybe more bottom up, actually, because that's the main leverage we have right now. And I think that's also the most efficient ways to solve the problems that we've seen. And yeah, I think we've talked a lot about interesting solutions today, about maybe private solutions. And I think we should maybe focus on this first, and then try to seek for policymakers to maybe implement those solutions at a European level.
Well said. I would throw in that my recommendation would be for a call for clustering. It's a really weird word, but what we've seen is when freelancers of a similar type, and this is going back to the whole definition debate we had a bit earlier, but when entities of a similar type come together, their bargaining power and their voice is much louder. And I definitely think that should be one of the main focuses for Freelancers Week next year, and especially this year. I think is what we kind of started with this year is you work for yourself, but you don't have to work alone. And to go back to Jeannine's earlier question about accounting, is we're seeing more and more what we call productized services coming into the market, and that's only possible when a clear pattern can be devised. For example, all the Uber solution for handing over tax information is only possible because the model for all of their independent drivers is, there's a pattern to it, it's identical. The same for all Toptal developers. Because their income stream from that source is similar, you can build a productized service to solve that problem. An accounting firm can spread the cost of building that solution across 1,000 developers as opposed to charging 100 developers. And I think that's definitely going to be something that we should be pushing freelancers or entrepreneurs or entrepreneurial entities into finding their tribes, find their people who are doing similar things, not only for the peer support, but also for the economic benefits of being in a bigger unit than just yourself. And that's what I would vindicate for the next several years.
From an EU institution perspective, I think what the immediate reaction always is like a new action. No, that's actually member states that need to take the action, so we can only guide. So what I think would be super useful, and I think that because we do see some great initiatives among member states, either from government or from private sector, if we could somehow, I wouldn't say institutionalize, but if we could kind of mechanism where Brussels can actually serve as a hub, that would be something very interesting, because then member states can draw inspiration from other member states and private sector can draw inspiration from other private sector, because at the end of the day, it's also, why does the private sector want policy reforms? What are they actually doing? So I think we have to do a lot of information sharing and really point towards practices that are actually showing that it does work. There is innovation going on that actually supports independent work. So I think best practice sharing is definitely, for me, one of the priorities, because then you can somehow go around this mechanism where people say this is actually member states level, and we can only give some guidelines to that.
You're muted, Jeannine.
Okay, there I go, third time lucky, right? So what I hear you saying is that you'd like to see the European Freelancers Week in the next year devote itself to sharing of best practices. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yes, the European Freelancers Week, but then also with a clear message to the European Commission, also to member states, but obviously also at the EU level, to really make the case for this best practice sharing, because we see that new technologies are coming and everyone seems to kind of think about how can we actually approach this, how can we help everyone to actually access all types of work that are consistent with the European social model. Where should we draw inspiration from? But it's actually coming from within. Obviously, we look a lot to the US because you have a lot of interesting innovations going on there, but innovation is happening in Europe as well. And I think we can actually learn to learn better from each other at EU level and within the EU member states.
I think we should have that on the individual level as well, and you know, continuing the theme of there's power in numbers. You know, let's break down the barriers and help more people come into the freelancing world. So you know, help people, give them advice on how to start, how to be successful, how to make it a sustainable option, and so on. So you know, as the numbers increase, the you know, the impetus for change and for betterment for all will be there.
Yeah, I do think that we have to be able to empower and support freelancers, but coming to the best practices, there has been some very interesting piece of work that is European, even worldwide, that comes from the UK actually, on very good practices. There was the Co-ops UK who did a report on freelancers, Not Alone and then Better Together. And then there was the Royal Society for the Arts who also did a whole study on the freelancers, which I thought was really interesting, about good practices and how they develop and what inspired. And indeed, I think that collaborations are important, but just like as I mentioned in the article I wrote, we also have to beware of what we're talking about, because we're in a sector where we don't always agree on what we mean when we talk about freelancers. We don't always agree on what we mean when we say we need more social protection. And as Marco was saying, who's paying it? So right. I think that freelancers need to gather. So it's really good to have a big movement, but it's also important that we are be aware of what we're saying, and or to make sure that we're talking about the same things, because we're all talking globish, but we come from different countries, and even though we may have a European or even United States approach, the realities in our different countries can be very different, and it's important to know what we really mean when we're using certain words, and what are the values that are driving us, and why do we say what we say. Because otherwise what's happening, and that's what the European Commission has been saying about self-employed and freelancers, is that they hear so many discordant voices, they just don't know what to do about it.
Yeah, I think that's
that was a bit what I wanted to write in the article, because we are very about collaborating with other organizations, but we do realize that we have to be careful of what is being said and what's behind the words. Like even the word UBI, it has so many different connotations. Some are for actual more social protection, and the other ones are just to say, okay, we give you the money, then there's no more school, you pay your school, your hospital, and everything. Those are very different views. So I think we really have to be careful when we advocate to and make a movement, just to understand to what extent are we moving together, and what do we agree on.
Jeannine?
Yeah, I think no. I was reflecting on what Sarah had to say. Alex, what would you like to see? Everybody here. That's the thing. Everybody here is a supporter of the European Freelancers Week. Everybody here is involved by intention, not by accident, in the European Freelancers Week. So, Alex, what do you think? What kind of call to action would you like to see from the European Freelancers Week between now and next year?
Yeah, I think one thing that's interesting is, in the European Union, we have freedom of movement and we have a single market. But beyond that, we like to pretend that it's really easy to collaborate and come together as freelancers, but there's lots of barriers there. So I think I really like this year's theme of not just focusing on how freelancers might come together in a co-working space to work together, but also how they can start working together, business-wise, and how they can expand their influence and their reach. Now, we spend a lot of time helping people enter the European market. People from India who set up their company in Estonia, and then they are a European freelancer in many ways. They work with European clients. They have a company here. So I would actually like to see maybe the focus on branching out, talking about how European freelancers can expand to the global market. It's not just for big companies. We have you can work from anywhere, and you can work for anyone. So I would think that would be really great focus maybe for next year, is maybe taking European freelancers worldwide, and how we can build business connections and other connections between those groups here and around the world.
Gosh, I like that. I like that a lot. Shiraz, you're not escaping this question. What would you like to see as the nobody's escaping, Brian? You're next. The other Brian. I need to rename you guys. What would you like to see in terms of a call of action for the European Freelancers Week between now and next year? Go.
Yes. So, but actually, I'm not going to be innovative. That's the main problem. But I think I would like to see more collaboration between the main players in the freelancing part. I think that. Yeah, it's true that we're in a huge continent, Europe, with a lot of different countries. But I think we should still strive to and advocate a harmonized state of mind, I would say, on freelancing. I think it should really be the focus of the collaboration, even if I know it's very hard and I know we all have different definitions, but I think maybe it should start by having a common definition on what is freelancing, and what do we want freelancing to become, and then we could actually take really actions all together. I think it's really important that we have a common vision, common European vision at first, in order to be able to be stronger for other countries, and to be able also to come with the power of the number, as you all said. But I think that, I'm just, so basically it's the same thing that you all said. I think collaboration is the key, but I also think that that we should be focused on Europe first, and that we should also try to maybe like blur a little bit the frontiers, the borders that exist between our countries.
All right, Brian. your turn. Brian, the Cowork Brian.
Yeah, I think
we already heard from Brian, from Toptal Brian.
From a perspective, and from an Irish perspective, I think I'm just going to repeat what others have said. From a micro level, I think what I would like to see is more coordination between freelancers in Ireland, and more sharing of some of the solutions to the issues that freelancers face are collaboration based, as we've touched off today. I think some of the discussion that has happened today would be very useful to share with freelancers, and I will be sharing it with freelancers in our community here. That's the first point. The second one I would say is from more macro level. I think in Ireland we could definitely do some advocacy from Europe on the benefits, be they economic or otherwise, of freelancers. The freelance community in Ireland, I think, has happened maybe organically, and it has grown from push and pull from market forces. I think there's definitely space from a government perspective in Ireland for more influence to accelerate the growth of freelancers and to coordinate the growth of freelancers so that it is structured rather than being more based on kind of market forces.
All right, there's only one person who's escaped this question. Do you know who it is? Marco. What do you want to see?
Well, I've heard what all of you had to say, and I think when I mentioned about the Freelancers Manifesto that is in preparation in view of next year election, I probably forgot to mention it will be a co-creation mechanism. So in the true spirit of European Freelancers Week, we will start with a blank sheet. So imagine a Google Doc, and in fact, everyone can input into that. The objective, the final aim, is to get to 5 points, not 6, because this is the format that worked well in the past, so we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We want to get to those 4-5 points. We want to develop them, of course. We want to create some recommendations around them, but it needs to be very concise, and we want to use the power of community to formulate these principles. All of you will be involved. There's no escape to that, but also people viewing us today and people following us at European Freelancers Week, we will find ways as much as possible to be inclusive and involve you all in continuing these discussions offline. And hopefully by the end of the year, we will come up with a real document for action, a real call for action. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay, well, now we've got that wrapped up, so we know what to do between now and next year, right? So, as I said, everybody here is a supporter of the European Freelancers Week. I think, let's see, William Gibson famously said that the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. I think all of you guys are busy one way or another with the freelancers, the freelance economy, because you saw something in the future. Hector, tell me what you see that's not evenly distributed, that the rest that everybody else doesn't see. It can either be your business or somebody else's business.
Well, considering I am a European in New York, branching out the European network as well, I'm pretty much blinkered by what we're building, so I can't really talk about what other people are looking at, but what we see as purely obvious is that bargaining power and buying power isn't in the hands of the people creating the value, and that's what we're trying to drastically shift around the world. We're trying to make sure that whether you're a freelancer, a salaried employee, or any type of freelancing entity or unit, you have the ability to get the best products, services, and social care that you deserve wherever you are in the world. And I think that that and the fact that people will become residents of the world is highly important things that it kind of seems weird now. Even digital nomads to some generations sounds like a strange idea. But I think increasingly as people start making decisions based on what matters to them in their lives, that includes where they work, when they work, how they work, and why they work, we're going to start seeing more and more adoption of this sort of freelance mentality, that you don't have to. I think that's also going to shift the way people are given actual full-time contracts, and the way work will change and where people will be based. So I think that's the main, I can't really quantify it, but I think we're going to realize that the way we work is broken, and we're slowly changing that into something that's more value-driven for the individual as opposed to for some entity. And that's what I see as completely obvious, and I'm hoping more and more people will see it as obvious in the coming years.
Thank you, Hector. Brian at Toptal, what do you have?
Yeah, so basically what Toptal is all about is the democratization of opportunity. So that's what we want to see more of in the future. I'll just keep it at that.
Well, concise and to the point. Sarah?
Yeah, I think we really have to reinvent work pace, rights of people. And I think that there's enough wealth around the world for everybody to live at least decently. And this has to happen. There's just no reason why it shouldn't. And then if people want to make more money, they have to be able to do it. And if they want to have more time with their family, they have to be able to do it too. And we also have to understand different paces in life. When you have a young kid or when you're older, you don't have the same needs. You can't work the same way with the same concentration. And we need to be able to take that in consideration. And I think that social dialogue has to be opened up to also citizens, because it's about our society and how we organize. It's not just about work. So we have to be able to have citizens reflect directly at the table with policymakers about how do we want to structure and design our society.
Excellent. Go, Sarah. Alex, let's ask the government.
Yeah, so I would just say that, you know, freelancers and entrepreneurs around the world the world's becoming smaller, and it doesn't matter if you grew up in a small village in Estonia or a small, you know, or big city in Africa or what have you. You know, you can have a good idea, and the only problem is that sometimes there are factors out there that stop you from taking this idea and to making it to its full potential. So we want to change that. We want to give people the right to, wherever they happen to be born and live, to access an environment, a business environment, where they can succeed in the global markets and really make their dreams come true, to use kind of a cliche. But you know, I think someone else said they want to democratize opportunity. That's what Estonia wants to do. You know, through Estonia, making Estonia a hub for business and providing people a platform and an opportunity to achieve what they want to achieve. And I think especially you know, in Europe, I think we have a big opportunity to help to give people this market and this platform from around the world. And it's only a benefit for everyone across Europe to start building these collaborations and business ties with people from around the world. So I hope we can all have this ideal of democratizing entrepreneurship, democratizing access to tools and platforms that make people successful, and also making sure that the governments catch up to the private sector. People expect, you know, the private sector has done so much in the last 10 years to empower entrepreneurship, but governments are still you know, sitting behind. So let's all hope governments can catch up to what everyone else is doing.
You were muted.
Microphone.
Am I doing it again? All right, Brian, let me ask you what you got to say. See, you already. Brian from Cowork.
This is Brian Cowork, I assume.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. Well, it's been a very interesting discussion, and I'll be taking a lot away from this. I think the what I'm particularly interested in seeing how the pace changes. So there's obviously a movement towards freelancing and a movement towards remote working, but I think it's been very organic. And I think the role of the role of the EU, the role of the government, I think can be much greater in terms of accelerating the growth of freelancing and of the remote working community. I think there's a lot of benefits to that, again, from macro and micro level. So I think that's really, I think, where we can really make an impact through this forum, and to kind of the kind of public sector, and I think that's where the big opportunity lies in the kind of short, medium term.
Thank you. And Laurin, you're last, but never least.
Okay.
Go.
Thanks. Sorry, I just got dropped out. I think what I would like to see is kind of a reframing of the debate, because obviously what we see is, especially in Europe, that independent work is often seen with insecurity. So I think that's also where obviously platforms have to play their part, that we make sure that new opportunities are consistent with the European social model. But I think it's difficult to explain sometimes, because many say like it does, like independent work involves a lot of risks. That's where the state and the private sector have to step in and address that. But also, I think it has to be understood that for many people, the quality of work is basically defined by many different factors. I think the world of work is changing, and what some have been saying is that family becomes important, having time to work from home, having time to work from wherever you want, and to really take all these aspects into consideration when you define the quality of work is something that needs to be redefined and needs to be pushed, that this is basically changing, and that we want to have this conversation. And for many people, working flexibly or working independently is actually an aspiration, and it's not only something that you are pushed into because you do not find employment, proper employment, as it would be framed, right? So this is a job for everyone, including well, all stakeholders, including platforms, including employers, including associations, policymakers. And that's what I would like to see, a reframing of the debate, that we see that there is a huge potential for new opportunities, but we really need to see how we can actually make them work in the European context.
Thanks. Wow, I should have started with that question. Those answers were so interesting. I think we're at the end of our time, are we not, Marco?
Yes, we are. Maybe a closing word, if I may. I would like to thank everyone for joining us today online and here on the panel. I think the conversation was very interesting. I will carry on this discussion myself, because next week I will attend 4 European Freelancers Week events, either remotely or physically. So I think there's a need to continue this discussion also physically with others, because that's what European Freelancers Week is all about. It's meet physically. And I urge every one of you from home to join these events near you. It's in 32 countries, so you really can't escape European Freelancers Week this year. And also continue these discussions with your peers over there. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.